for joining me. So, yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Murray. Um, I've been with Integrated Projects not for long now, maybe about 3 months or so. But Integrated Projects is weird that we're all spread all over the world. So it's quite nice being in South Africa and being part of a mostly American company and being part of the conversations that are in America and the conversations that are happening all over the world, even though, I'm here in South Africa. So that's me. And then Covetool first of all, Atoms to Bits. So Atoms to Bits is integrated project or my little outreach program. But the outreach is interesting because what do? You don't just want to A, talk shop, or B, just kind of advertise our products. I've followed Cove.tool for a little bit. You've got a nice product. I think we've got a nice product. But let people go search for our advertising or go search for, like they'll see our advertising. Your product's amazing. Go look for it. But rather than that, like there's conversations around BIM and around energy modeling and sustainable development, which a lot of people don't know. Like they don't know where the conversation should be going. And that's why Jose said he was talking to you, and I said, please let me talk to you. I want to kind of get your opinion on all of this and see, how we take that conversation forward.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, my background, I'm one of the co-founders here at Covetool, but I'm the CPO. So I basically set how the product should go, what we think we should build next, things like that. And it's funny sitting in South Africa because one of our investors, Sean Abramson, he's from South Africa.
Oh, nice.
So I think he's still, even though he's lived in California since like the late 90s, he's still got his South African accent. He won't let it go, is what he said.
Yeah, we like it here. And a lot of people think we've got weird accents, or they don't place it as South African. They place it as Australian or British or somewhere in between. But
No, it's funny. Like I'm from like the Midwest of the United States, so like my accent is the one that most people in the United States will understand. But I live in Georgia now, in Atlanta, which is in the South. So a lot of people, they have their really crazy accent in the South. So it's like sometimes I have to really pay attention if I'm talking to a contractor or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And South Africa is the same. So I'm like natively an English speaker, but 3/4 of the country isn't. Either they're Afrikaans or there's all sorts of languages around. So at least English is my first language, whereas a lot of South Africa, you've got accent plus you've got second or third language down. So understanding us is interesting. You were saying, okay, so one of your investors is a South African. The Iron Man story is one of your investors is Iron Man. That's the truth, yes?
Yeah, one of our investors is Robert Downey Jr. So, that's always kind of cool to have someone who's like that interested in climate tech also be someone who people know about. So we're kind of able to have those kinds of conversations, and he'll usually do something about once a year to help us from a marketing side as well. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, very cool, very cool. So obviously climate tech, that's what you guys do. How do you, I've been in reality capture, scan to BIM for 4 or 5 years now, and I was in architecture for the 15 years before that. But for the last 5 years, I haven't tried to design a thing. I've just been drawing what's there. But that's your primary market, isn't it? What you do is the world is changing, everything is heating up. As architects or MEP engineers, they're the people who need to reduce carbon emissions and reduce embodied carbon and sort out daylighting and all sorts of things. That's what you guys are here for. You provide a tool for the architects. Yeah, that's basically it. How do you know?
Oh, yeah. And I was just going to ask you, did you want to record this as well?
I'm recording it on OBS, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That works. Because I was going to say, I could record it from my side too, but yeah, if you already got it going, go for it.
Do. Before we go too far, can you record it on your side anyway?
Just in case.
Yes, technical glitches happen all the time. I'd love to see. So I've got OBS recording next to me. every now and again something will. You never know. Mine
Yeah, that
will
makes
work
sense.
perfectly,
That
and
makes
I won't
sense.
have audio. Or
That's
yeah.
super cool. Yeah, because I guess like one of the things that we also try to do is also promote other startups too. Like that's one of our main goals is to create so from a product standpoint, what I feel like we're doing is we're building a node
Mm-hmm.
on what I call like the building information network, which is like a real-time understanding of a project. I feel like, right now we have every 3 months, maybe we have a good understanding of the project, but, kind of trying to make it so that everyone is able to have interoperability between their different platforms so that the information is always real time. So that's kind of like why I try to engage a lot with other startups, just to see if we can make sure that our apps interact with each other.
Make sure everybody's kind of talking the same language, and so um, I suppose there's a few parts to that. One is jumping between software platforms. As for Revit, everybody loves Revit. Speckle, however, cheapest. I tried to use Speckle and I mucked it up a few times, but Speckle is probably Speckle or IFC is the way to go. Revit, we all hate Revit. We know we all hate Revit. I sit in front of Revit my whole life, so I love it and hate it. Yeah, one of those people. If you spend 8 hours in front of a product every day, you absolutely hate the product. And there are many open letters, and I agree with them all. Yeah, but so that's one part of it. So that's you are creating kind of this hub of apps who aren't huge multinationals, and who can answer kind of a little niche kind of question. Covetool have got stacks of different things from like energy modeling to there's the AIA 2030 little app plugin. You've got a whole bunch of apps, and that's what you want. And we've got our scan to BIM part that comes in. None of us are trying to be Autodesk and trying to be in 4 or 5 products, and you'll never leave Autodesk. It's complicated though, and it all boils down to probably IFC or whatever Speckle's doing. But how does that work out for
Yeah,
you?
and for us, what we've been doing is we have like a simplified like JSON
Mm-hmm.
format that uses our API. So that's usually how we connect to other software, to create like single plane geometry from like a complex model. And we actually have an IFC import and export as well, because we have like a drawing tool that allows people to like import a model and clean it up for the purposes of like analysis or HVAC design
For
or
sure.
something like that. And so that's kind of like what we see is that real-time understanding is when people start to connect things together. I've seen some success from the Speckle kids, but also at the same time, there's like several other large, engineering firms that don't want to use Speckle because they don't believe that Arup is no longer associated with it. So they're afraid that their information will be seen by Arup or something.
Oh, really?
uh,
There's
so
lots of
you got
politics
like,
there.
yeah. So I don't know. There's a need for a standard that is not connected to um, any particular firm that originated. So that's where I think like the whole SaaS web-based world of apps,
Yeah.
where they're not coming from a background of a firm is kind of like super helpful to kind of make sure it's an unbiased source of truth and that information is not getting mixed. Because a lot of like some of these big firms are national security clients. They have like people who are designing the super secret lab. They can't let that information leak. So there's like a lot of like data security that I think drives the
Well, that's a
conversation,
complicated.
also liability.
Yeah, that data security is a complicated thing these days because we're getting more and more to be on the web all the time. How do you? Are your products? You don't download your apps, do you? You deal with your app straight on the web. So how are you going to get the data into it in the first place? Um,
Yeah.
with those kind of security issues, it's a
Yeah,
complicated thing, yeah.
I think the thing is that now a web-based application, because there's so many of them,
Mm-hmm.
more so than anything else, is actually more secure than a desktop-based app. Obviously, if you download some software, that information can get locked on a laptop that could be stolen or whatever. But with like with a web-based application, everything is you're continuously in charge of the data. So I think also too, like a AWS or Google Cloud or whoever is going to be like way more secure than any implementation that a firm could do.
Fair enough.
They have like
Absolutely.
more of an interest in and maintain like the FedMap standards or whatever for cybersecurity. So you're going to end up with, I think you end up with a more secure thing, because you can enforce like two-factor authentication. You can do things with like a one-time login codes. You can use like Microsoft logins. There's just like lots of ways to secure it like way better than if it was on your actual desktop.
Okay, so how are we? So people are designing like this now. Designing is becoming completely online, and so that's amazing for a start. That you're not stuck in this kind of pre-COVID, pre-pandemic world where everybody's sitting in the office and around a boardroom table and designing like that, and you can be in Atlanta and I can be in Durban, and we can sit around a virtual meeting with virtual apps. The whole thing is happening online. Like you say, with AWS or Google's kind of security backend, which, those big corporates, kind of the Google security we love, but we also want to have the choice of whatever software we need to dive into, and that's why you've got 10 different things that you're selling, and there's all sorts. You're not the only people who are providing a kind of a great platform on the web, and it's that interoperability between us, between Covetool, Bimit. We're hopefully providing the kind of as-built stuff. There are all sorts of other people around providing apps, whether it's inside of Revit or to jump in between. I think that's how we lose the Revit dominance. It is not by rebelling against an authoring program. It seems like we're kind of making Revit redundant without trying, because we will do our little bit and you'll do your little bit, and eventually there's nothing left for Autodesk to do in the middle. I don't know that I've got a question.
You're right.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing is that's really cool is, like, if you think about it, like, the firm, your IP is the ideas and the information that you're generating. So, like, if you can kind of view as a firm leader the information as the thing, not necessarily like the drawings, but it's like the information that is derived from those drawings, then if everything is interoperable, then your data is truly portable, like from one thing to the next. So you're not like locked into a particular platform. You're just like, you're more like able to see that data, download it. The information is like traveling neatly, so there's no translation losses between each application. That's like the holy grail, but I think probably more likely than not that's where everything's headed.
Yeah, and also the thing is that although we've been building information modeling kind of experts for a while now, I think that there's a chance that building information model, some central source of truth, is kind of fading out. That you don't need a model anymore. It's almost outdated. We're trying to transfer information between people. There's, like, I'm looking at your background of some facade, the green facade versus the yellow facade. That's actually the important part. That you can see it in 3D, that's great. But it's this information transfer. And by by trying to communicate rather than trying to build a model or draw a drawing, that's how we're pulling this off. We're trying to communicate information. We're not just trying to build a model of a building. And there you go. The model is irrelevant now, which actually makes it interesting. I don't know how we play it out then.
Is that, how, like, there's certain relationships of rooms that are patterns of, like, a hospital or an apartment building. Yeah. Or, wouldn't it be great if we could Google our models, so to speak, and say, like, show me all the rooms in this project that have windows on two sides. And you could say, like, oh, these are going to be more higher quality daylight and this one has more views, or show me all the rooms that don't have views, or the ones that are missing a door, or being able to ask questions in a more interactive manner, and then the software respond back. It kind of, I guess, my guiding light is definitely Nicholas Negroponte from like the 1970s. He had this like idea of the architecture machine, and it's like where you're having like this very interactive relationship with a computer around the architectural design. But I think a lot of things like errors and omissions or things like that are just caused by like the sheer complexity. So my goal is to hopefully get us back to the point where we're mostly designing, and then the computer is kind of filling in the gaps.
But there's
something I'm excited about.
Yeah, but there's two sides to that. I mean, one is errors and omissions, and does your building comply with the code, and have you double checked everything? But B is, well, the computer can crunch numbers a whole lot better than we can, and I think you started heading down this route, that there's a lot of kind of machine learning, amazing things happen. It's tying that in as a designer, being able to tie in some machine learning kind of algorithm of how rooms fit together in a hospital, or can we get like double-sided windows to the maximum number of rooms. These are things that a computer could probably do better than a human already. And where does the human fit in? But how does the human kind of harness all of these things? So absolutely, you want to be doing error checking kind of with the computer. But your kind of company and mine, we're pushing the technology as far as we can. We think that there's an awful lot you can do with the computer, whether it's daylighting analysis or fresh air analysis, which a human couldn't do, or a human could take weeks to do. So that's where the advantage comes in, and we don't need to be people who are worried that kind of machines are going to take our jobs. Rather, the machines are just offering us new tools to push that forward a bit.
Yeah, because I was talking to the guys at Big Architects in Copenhagen, because I went and visited their office, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting is they talked about how basically the key to their success was basically reducing the design cycle. So the time it takes to go from one design iteration to the next, they got it down to like they could do an entire building like the one they did for Google's new headquarters with all the sloped, kind of roof things.
Yeah,
they were able to get those processes down for all the different steps to check a design down from like a month to like a week. But the part that was the limiting factor now was the daylight analysis was the longest part of the whole process.
Oh, really?
So I just thought that was kind of like an interesting thing, because it's not just them, but many other firms. I'm starting to see that this general trend is emerging where the machine does 80% of the work. The human provides like the design intent. But at the end of the day, this goal is to reduce that cycle time so that you can arrive at a more well-considered, building solution. Is kind of like the thing that seems to be the trend that I've been observing just across the world. Because, we have like users and, all, I guess like we have maybe 23 different countries that are all using Covetool. So a lot of your 3-letter firms as well.
Yeah.
So we kind of start to see these broad trends start to emerge, which is exciting.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm at Integrated Projects in Pimmet. We kind of do the same thing where we've got projects from all over the world. It's quite nice to be capturing models from all over the world and seeing how similar everybody's construction technology is. I mean, like I never work, like I was saying, in new build anymore. It's always kind of existing conditions. But even so, you can. Well, I suppose it's always complicated. It's like on the one hand, there are standard building techniques everywhere. On the other hand, you can very easily like look at a building and you can see an Australian building a mile away, even if you're just looking at the point cloud or just looking at the model. The world is quite globalized, but not that much. So I heard that you have something like 20,000 users. You must have. Yeah, is design moving forward across the world in the same way, and especially from a ecological or kind of sustainable development point of view?
I think definitely from a digital practice standpoint, it's moving ahead at this relatively the same rate. I'd say from like a environmental thing though, what has happened in the last year or two is that basically like the financial markets around the world have decided that climate risk equals financial risk. And so that has started to really unify the push for embodied carbon and operational carbon from like running your electricity and whatnot as being the two factors that are starting to really come to top of mind, in addition to the financial aspect, of course. But like that's coming to top of mind for a lot of your people who are providing loans to developers. And then therefore developers are coming to their architects and saying like, hey, we got to have this because, now you're getting interest rates that are different depending on your ESG score. So it's like if you're trying to do a big building in Miami in the United States, it's like on the coast with, where there's really massive climate change and lots of flooding. And so like
you're starting to see projects.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of projects I've heard that are no longer being built now in Miami because the climate risk was so high that it would have destroyed the asset. And they're moving those projects to other cities where migration is happening away from the coast. So there's kind of like, you're starting to see that, I think around the world, there's consensus building that financial thing is really what's driving most people's decision making. Not necessarily just like, oh, we should do something green.
Is that what pushed it over the edge? I would have loved it to be, we should do something green. But you take the win where you can get it. So if people are, great, if ecological risk equals financial risk, we'll take it. And that means, like you say, carbon, embodied carbon. So do you guys, I haven't really searched through Covetool. Do you guys do a full kind of like life cycle analysis? Embodied carbon from the coal to make the steel kind of thing?
Yeah, so we do the embodied carbon A1 through A3, which is like your manufacturer carbon profile. In our main, we've been doing a lot of work for the last year on building automated structural calculations that can help us estimate the volume of structural material so we can do a full embodied carbon calculation automatically. And so that is actually currently like in our testing phase. So we're releasing that in December. But the thing that's really cool is we already have embodied carbon as part of our cost versus energy versus carbon optimization. So you can like use machine learning to sort through thousands of alternatives for your building. To find the one that's the lowest cost, lowest carbon, lowest energy use. So that's been cool. But yeah, I think the one where we can actually provide like a true carbon calc for the whole building, that's happening really soon. So we're pretty jazzed about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there's new regulations coming in all the time. So New York has got this LL97, which I'm hearing about a lot, which is operational carbon, I guess. But it's happening everywhere. I don't know many other examples, but everybody is tracking their carbon. Everybody is tracking their emissions. Is this basically throughout? If you're a building owner anywhere, you should know A, what the embodied carbon in your building is, and B, what I would say mostly what your emissions are, but you might argue that.
Yeah, absolutely, especially if you're doing renovations, because the most the least carbon intensive building is the one you don't tear down. So like a lot of so like the kind of work that you all are doing is the kind of projects that are going to have the biggest carbon impact, because like to build a new high performance building, it would take 100 years to offset the carbon from building a brand new building if you just keep the old one. So there's kind of like it's just kind of interesting to see that like everyone's thinking about it now and doing something. So like for example in Europe, they're going to start requiring embodied carbon calculations for your building permit. Also in California, they're starting to do the same thing. So, and I think probably UK will introduce that as a requirement soon. So there's like, the momentum is building that the consensus is that you can't design because also because finance is aligned too, right? So like if you're going to introduce a new code and the finance guys want to have that anyway, there's now like a alignment of incentives.
Well, that's it. Like it feels a little bit like the bankers have aligned with everybody else, and actually that's changing everything. I'd love it if it were different, but yeah, like I say, we'll take the wins where we can get them.
One last thing I will add to that though is that it's not just the bankers; it's the manufacturers. So like if I have a commodity-based product like brick, and two companies have the same exact brick, but one makes it with one kind of electricity and the other one makes it with another kind. Now they have two different products that they can sell to an architect or engineer. So there's what we're starting to see is there's a race down that's being driven by the market forces of materials. So we're engaged with a lot of manufacturers right now who are trying to sell based on their carbon profile, like
that's fantastic.
Drywall. Yeah, they're like they can make drywall that's 20% less embodied carbon by like what factory they get it from. Yeah.
Somebody was asking me the other day, we were talking about New York and American law, and surely South Africa is doing the same thing. Yeah, but not very much. Really, what South Africa is doing is we are producing a lot of steel and bricks and coal, and we think you should use as much coal as possible in South Africa, I'm afraid. But we're losing out because of it, and a lot of people can see that we sell our steel, which is made with an awful lot of coal, and nobody thinks it's green at all, and somebody across the world is selling their steel, which is greener, and suddenly nobody wants to buy our steel anymore.
There's steel plants now that are solar powered, so they're producing, like, I think last year they produced the first 100% green steel, where it's like made, the embodied carbon is zero embodied carbon from the electricity from production. So I think that's going to be crazy.
Do you think the built environment's going to catch up to wherever they need to be? So, like if you pick a model of how quickly the Earth is heating or how much needs to get done, what needs to get done is mammoth. And are we doing things? Well, the AEC industry is picking up slowly, but too little, too late, or can we fix it?
Yeah, I mean, from an embodied carbon standpoint, we got like in the Architecture 2030 reporting, where people report their projects. Last year was a 4% of projects had an embodied carbon calculation. That's not great.
No, not at all.
But the previous year it was 1%. So that means it's scaling exponentially. So that's a good sign. Will it be enough? Right now that we're definitely locked in, according to scientists, into at least a 2 to 2.5 degree world. Probably right now, if we continue our current track, it's like 4 degrees Celsius on average higher for everyone, which is pretty catastrophic. So I think at this point, what we're looking at is the difference between like Mad Max versus like very unpleasant. My goal is to like bend the curve and do what I can. But I think like if everyone, I think right now we're at 4% is what I would say to goal.
Yeah.
So I think like there's still time to avoid the worst case scenario.
Yeah, well, there you go. Although it's probably pretty bad. I mean, 2 degrees C is still...
That's horrible.
It's still pretty horrible, yeah.
But like 4 degrees Celsius is like the world population collapses to like 2 to 3 billion people by 2100. So we'll top out at 10, drop to 3. So that's not great.
It's not great, and we can see this within our lifetime or within the lifetime of our kids. So my youngest just turned 13 yesterday, and so in 80 years' time or in 70 years' time, that's the end of the century.
According to the limits of growth, the worst time, financially, food production wise, pretty much everything you can think of, is like between 2030 and 2040. That's like that's the decade of like, no matter what scenario of emissions that we do right now, that's the decade of extreme disruption.
And are we actually playing to this? Are we going, sure, by 2030, my industry, your industry, and my industry are going to turn on their heads. We accept this. What are we doing about this? In the next 8 years, I wanted to make the point, actually. Like, you've dedicated your career to addressing climate change. Like, Covetool does other things, but I've been very interested in climate change for 20 years, and I'm still just an architect. I'm still not, like, a sustainable development expert. Well played for doing that, but how do you go about doing it? Yeah.
I think you got to eat the elephant a little at a time. You got to help people like pick that low hanging fruit. Like the true enemy is not that we don't have the tools to figure it out. The true enemy is that we don't have like the will. So it's more like the priority. So it's like a lot of people will feel overwhelmed by the complexity of the problem.
Yeah.
So they don't do anything. But in reality, they could just decide to renovate. They could use integrated project and do your guys' process. Or that's very easy. Or they could do things like maybe they should just make sure that their building is 20% better than code. Like that's still a lot of carbon every single year.
Yeah, and that's still a big thing. And yeah, you're right. One bite at a time. It's the little things that can make such a difference.
Especially in buildings, because nothing you do is small. So like any decision you make, like if you're like, wait, let's not put gas in this project, and somebody is going to go, oh, we don't know what the right pool, specification would be for this, and you're like, okay, I'm going to online. Here's some brand new equipment. It's like half the cost of the stuff that you guys want to use with gas, and it has an app for your phone, so you can actually control your heating costs, better. Like there's most of the things that are carbon better for the environment are actually cheaper now because manufacturers are switching to the lower carbon thing because that's where the market is bigger for that. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but most doing things the right way is almost always cheaper right now.
Yeah.
It's just people don't think about it, So, but you have to ask, you have to push when the contractors complain about something, you're the owner. You have to be like the more mature person in the room and say like, hey guys, like for your own good, I'm going to push you to like, we're going to look at this one more time, make sure we get it right.
Let's just look at the numbers quickly and see, because I'm sure we're doing it the wrong way around. I'm sure it's cheap. It is finally cheaper, and it has been. People have been arguing for decades that solar is more expensive, or perhaps it was, but times change.
Now it's cheaper. For a house, for example, if you compare to backup power in the United States, it's $15,000 for a gas generator for backup power on a single family home.
Yeah.
Now it's $14,000 for a full solar array with battery backup, and you get free electricity.
And you compare it to like the US is one thing. In South Africa, we have issues where our national power utility switches the power off for 2 hours every day because they don't have enough power. And so a diesel generator costs a fortune, and any solar power, pays itself back straight away.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of like smart things. Or for example, ductless mini splits. Most of the world is switching, especially like India, for example. I've been there many times, and almost everyone has a ductless system. But in the United States, people are still installing ducted systems into houses, which is like double the cost of a ductless mini split. So it's like habit is more so the enemy too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm afraid it's like that with the kind of, like I wanted to circle back to your idea of digital practice and how digital practices are maybe the same globally. And how does that relate to, sorry, I got sidetracked. I'm thinking like how does one, I hate to lose the train of thought. You see, if we're all pushing forward with embodied carbon, we're getting cheaper electricity. As architects and as designers, whether people are building kind of existing buildings or new builds, the idea of digital twins and what we're doing and what you're doing to create digital twins, this is where my brain is trying to go. How does all that kind of design talk with all these little apps that you're creating, and with a globalized practice where everybody's doing everything on the web in terms of design, how does that relate to the digital? How are we changing our design, our ways of design now in the 21st century to kind of match that change of workflow, I guess?
Yeah, I think like you probably aren't changing the most effective technologies where you don't change how you design. Is kind of like my take on it. So it's like you want to minimize disruption and minimize the complexity. Mm-hmm. I think the great thing if you're a software developer anywhere, but especially in the AEC, you have to remember that every click equals money. So every time someone has to do something, that means they have to get training. Yeah. Potentially, the less automatic something is, all input is error. There's a saying of another South African, Elon Musk.
Famous South Africans, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of I definitely ascribe to that. That whenever you make changes into a digital process, like as a person who's designing or doing work, you want to make sure that every time you do something, that thing is intentional, because it's kind of like the error bar. If you've ever seen like a hurricane plot or a typhoon plot, like it has like, maybe it'll be here or over there. That's the uncertainty. So uncertainty is introduced whenever we start guessing in a process. So a lot of times if you rely on automation, then you can actually like narrow the error bar, and then your projects start turning out more correct. But I think you really have to make sure that as you're doing these more digital processes, you don't want to become over reliant on a computer, but like what you're trying to do is say, like, I'm trying to understand what is decision making flow, and I'm going to quantify what that is. So it's like a lot of times that doesn't mean necessarily a computer. It could mean a checklist, or it could mean that's an algorithm that helps you avoid errors, or like use hand drawing for a conceptual design rather than using Revit, because hand drawing is probably faster. So it's like understanding like what decision do I need to make? What's the appropriate tool for this stuff? Rather than like I just learn tools and I apply them willy-nilly to whatever task I'm working on because I don't know another technique. So it's like we go to school for architecture, we learn all these different techniques like hand modeling, drawing, drafting, 3D modeling. A lot of times people graduate without a sense of why did I learn those things and how do I solve the problem that I'm working on using the most appropriate tool. So I think like that is the question that I always ask people when I think about like, they're like, oh, so how should I do this? I'm like, well, what works for you now as an architect? Do you design with hand models? If so, if you make models, then you should be using, a different process than the guy who draws by hand versus the guy who uses Grasshopper. Like, you need to like know your process, know thyself, maybe.
Yeah, but know thyself. But also, I suppose if you're an architect in the 21st century, you've got to spend an awful lot of time knowing whatever products are out there, or whatever. Like, great, use the appropriate tool. Which one is that? There's a list, and there's going to be 45,000 tools which you could choose from. I guess if you're the poor architect, you keep searching, and that's it. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's like a framework for evaluating what kind of software you should use. So one, you have to kind of like take that and actually do a real, like most of the time in like consulting world, people have a process for adopting software. In AEC, we just like, we see something online, maybe we buy that, we don't know. Or so you have to know that there's all these different stakeholders in your firm. Like there's the like if it's a reasonable sized firm, there's several principals, there's the project managers, there's the people who actually do the work. So you have to like you have to do testing to figure out like how does this work with our process, and then quantify like how much time did it take to learn. And so there's like a cost of using the software in terms of training. A lot of times people don't factor that in, so they'll see something that's free and they'll be like, oh, I'll just use that free thing, but they don't realize it's maybe like 100 hours of training to get someone to be able to use it. Whereas like maybe there's something that they can pay for that takes them an hour of training. So like kind of like doing a full life cycle analysis, one could say, of the software that you're purchasing is typically the key to like not making a bad decision.
But it's going to be like absolutely never ending. Your processes, your office processes in an architectural firm, like what the architectural firm is, whatever the scale, and whether you're a 5-man firm or a 100-man firm, it's going to be much the same. Working through your processes and going, is this one of those things that we need to optimize, or is this one of those things where maybe human flair or a specialist skill kind of comes into play? What you'll find in all sorts of weird cases, you might be a heritage architect for a town, a specific kind of town's architecture, and then you, the human, kind of have knowledge which you're not going to be able to replace anywhere. But that's only one instance. Like each of those processes, you have to look through and go, yeah, that one we're not going to change, but what about this one, and what about this one, and what about this one? So,
yeah, I think in today's world, if you want to be competitive and make, like productivity in AEC has kind of bottomed out, for the last, 20, 30 years, we can see that. That's why everybody's writing these open letters to Autodesk. It's like, we're not getting productivity gains. So you have to ask yourself, like, yes, this new technology is great, but does it actually generate productivity gains? Can we validate that? Does the company or whatever or person that we're working with, do they give us the ability to verify that the actual business savings, like, I mean, there is like the process that one uses as an artist, as an architect, but then there's also like an architecture firm is a business. So if we can say, like, if we can start to assign hours, like, you can be a certain number of hours do this, certain hours do that, kind of borrowing some of those lessons from software world where it's like the agile development workflow where you're like, you make stuff, you have retrospectives where you sit down at the end of every 2 weeks and everyone says, like, what's working, what's not working. Identify those, kind of blockers and then come up with solutions for them, whether that's a checklist, a new piece of software, Bob and Dave need to have a meeting once a week, whatever it is that we come up with. We have to make sure that we're dedicated to this idea of increasing, workflow efficiency so that, even if you're doing some high design project, you're able to deliver those at a reasonable, like, cost to you as the architect so that you can, capture more profits, pay people more, work less hours,
Indeed.
Those are all the things that, like, need to happen.
Everybody wants that. Even if you're trying to be an architect, you're still being an architect to get rich, or at least nominally rich. Like, you would undoubtedly retire if you could. That's so you're talking about kind of agile and lean processes compared to the very typical waterfall construction process. The AC industry has hated the changeover, and like when I left the formal kind of construction industry about 5 years ago, everything was a Gantt chart with the critical path. And that's recently, and I know South Africa is backwards, but it's still recently. Whereas outside of the traditional architecture or construction processes, I'm kind of do software type things, and you kind of do software type things. We're used to talking about agile and kind of Scrum methodologies and all that kind of stuff. Everybody in architecture, they're still fighting that, or maybe less so, but it's not an easy changeover to suddenly think of a building which is a 3-year project or a 5-year project. How do you design a 5-year project in 2 week sprints? Isn't an easy switch.
Yeah, and I think too, the real forcing factor is the labor movement within architecture. So all these young kids that are like graduating, and they're like, this is unreasonable. This doesn't make sense. It's not up to the standards of like the 21st century way of working. Like, why are we doing these like super slow things? Maybe we should fix them. Why I'm working 80 hours a week. That doesn't seem like this is a well-run concern,
Surely there's a better way.
Yeah, so I think that is honestly the thing that will eventually, the need for more data to hit, your embodied carbon goals. You can't do them using traditional practice, and the need to like kind of take care of the new labor force and not repeat the mistakes of, yesteryear.
Yeah.
Those two things are pushing from two sides on all these firm leaders to try to like deliver a better workflow that's more digitally enabled. So it's like, I think what we'll see is just this continuous kind of like turning of the screws until people are like, fine, let's adopt this new tech and go for it.
Oh, in your mind, you can see a goal. The gears are turning slowly. We're adopting, however you just called it, kind of digital processes towards a goal. One day, eventually, all of these old CEOs are going to get in their mind and agree with what people are pushing for. What are people pushing for? These digital workflows.
Honestly, lately, what we found, like, first off, our software was definitely for the sustainability folks. But what we found is that it's actually the CFOs the people who control the money in the firm, who are the most interested in building performance, because they know that if they can avoid one design revision per project team per year, that's like a 3 to 6% profit increase for the firm. So then they did the math, because most architects don't do the math on that, but they've done that. So what we're seeing is that like it's really the financial leaders of firms that are the biggest people pushing, this idea of performance and digital practice forward, because they actually see the money profitability intersection, I guess. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it, is that because the financial incentives are now aligned, you're just going to see more and more people kind of like pushing that forward.
Cool. Fantastic. We're heading towards the end of the time, so I wanted to say, thanks so much for talking to me. This has been really interesting. I've learned a whole lot more. I'd love to kind of continue this conversation, pretty soon, and see from there. And the guy off screen, he's great too.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries at all. I just wanted to. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, sorry about that. Yep.
No problem, Patrick. No problem. Cool. I just wanted to say, thanks, actually. So we're 10 minutes before we're reaching the end. So let's kind of wrap up. It's been really interesting. I want to carry on and learn more about kind of what you're doing, but let's schedule that for another time. And see how we move this conversation forward, and see how we pull in everybody who's not necessarily at the edge of software development. How do we pull them into what we're doing with creating better tools? Anyway, it's been fantastic to meet you. Look forward to carrying on.
It's super cool and really fun conversation. I always enjoy talking to folks who are like interested in like solving the problem, because it really is there's an infinite number of digital problems to be solved.
Absolutely.
Our industry has been moving rather slow. So but I think it really does come down to collaboration, this like sharing is caring kind of attitude when it comes to fixing it. And, I think a lot in the past, people used to be like, oh, I'm going to hold on to all my things I've learned. Whereas like, if you just open up and give people like, hey, we already fixed this, like, why don't you use that? It kind of helps people solve new problems.
And I guess that's the software approach versus the architecture and IP approach, where in software there's open source libraries. If something's been solved, then it's an open source library, which pushes everything forward. And that's exactly what we should be doing in AEC as well.
Maybe someday we'll have a Stack Overflow for architects. We'll see.
But it's going to be up to you and me to produce it, I'm afraid. So, but it could be good.
Yeah. Well, super cool. Thanks for doing this. This was really cool.
Cool. Thanks very much. It's been nice to meet you. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Take care.